Director of Member and Public Relations for ARECA Insurance Exchange, a reciprocal insurance company that specializes in providing insurance coverage to nonprofit electric utilities and a sister company to APA. Before coming to APA and AIE, Michael spent 4 years as Chief of Staff in the Alaska Senate and 2 years as a legislative liaison for Connect Arm Crossing Project. He began his career in Alaska as a reporter for the Matsu Valley Frontiermen. And we also learned just before this all started that Michael is a 14-year resident of Alaska and from Ohio.
Right.
So, Michael, welcome, and we're glad to have you here today.
Thanks a lot. I've since renounced my Ohio citizenship, so full on Alaskan. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the snow. My folks still live back in Ohio, so I like to send them photos from things I do up here. And I just took one of my rental car this morning. I said May 1st, Fairbanks. Yeah. My dad wrote back, keep it. So that was always good. But I really like being up here. I came up yesterday and I met with some of our members while I was in town, so it was a good day. And so I'm here today. Hannah asked me to talk about power in Alaska, where we are in 2018. I think maybe I should back up a little bit. So APA is a statewide trade association for electric utilities in the state of Alaska. So Golden Valley Electric is a member, Doyon Utilities is a member. I think those are the only two Fairbanks regional utilities, although Doyon serves the basis. And we provide government relations on the state and federal level. We do training throughout the year for our members. We hold many conferences throughout the year. In fact, our annual meeting is in Fairbanks this year at the Wedgwood in August. And since this is Fedco, I will mention we typically spend anywhere between $75,000 to $100,000 in the community when we come up here. And we bring about 200 people from in the state and outside the state. And the outside the state folks are the money spenders. I mean, these guys come up and we get vendors or whoever else from the lower 48 that want to come up and they buy souvenirs out the wazoo for their families. So it could be a pretty good economic influx for Fairbanks when they come in. And we're real happy. The Wedgwood has treated us great. Golden Valley's hosting the meeting. And so I've been up here in a couple, what do we call them, site visits to get ready. And I'll be up here again over the summer. And it's been going terrific. So thanks to the broader community for having, hopefully we don't party too hard and not get invited back, right? So Power in Alaska, I don't know what happened with my logo there. It's not usually all cross-stitched like that. It looks like my grandmother knitted it or something. But where we are in 2018, so this is kind of a statewide look about where things are in 2018. But I kind of want to go back, I already said what we do, so here's what we do. Let me go back and look at the beginning real quick. I always find this interesting. I'm a history buff. To think that the first Alaska Electric Utility was actually founded in 1893 in Juneau. That's Alaska Electric Light and Power. They had a Gold Creek, a hydro project actually. Gold Creek provided the power down there. Of course, it was gold rush, fever, and they had a lot of folks coming up. The co-op movement really began in the 40s, and anyone who looks at the history of the Rural Electrification Administration in the 30s during the Depression era will know that electric cooperatives became a model to power rural America during the Depressions under the New Deal type stuff. And they really started popping up in the 40s. You can see the list, Golden Valley. I can't remember the exact dates, but they're in the 40s, trust me. And there's even a lot of cooperative sharing. MEA helped to stand up Unilocleats Cooperative and the cooperative at Stony River as well. In fact, interesting story about MEA. Three MEA employees actually perished in a plane crash while they were flying out to Unilocleat to help them get their co-op, going out Unilocleat. So co-ops live by the 7 cooperative principles. I should be able to say them, but I can't remember them right now. So, and it's based off of what is it called? It's an English movement, a cooperative business model. So nonprofit, member-owned, member-governed co-ops. You guys are probably all very aware of Golden Valley and how they operate. It's a good model, especially, I think, I'm kind of biased, but, I grew up in Ohio under Duke Energy, was a big IOU. Nothing against IOUs, they're in our membership, but there's, an IOU doesn't necessarily give you the level of control that you can have for participation. I mean, anybody here could probably make an appointment with Corey Borgeson and go talk to him at Golden Valley. I don't think you can do that at a big, multi-state investor-owned company. So it's a great model. A little history, and we did a book many, many years ago looking at the history of co-ops in Alaska, and there's a picture I found of a Golden Valley appliance store in the 1960s. Of course, one of the ways that co-ops got people to use more energy was they sold them appliances, right? Hey, the electric co-op has an appliance store. We'll sell you a refrigerator and all this stuff, and then you plug it in, and there's your energy sales. And and of course, it was a service to the community as well, not just to sell power. But it was interesting. I don't know who that is. Maybe somebody recognizes that woman there. Her name was not in the book, so I'm not sure. So when I go to the lower 48 and I meet some of my compatriots, or whatever you want to call them, they're always amazed about how unique Alaska is. We're an islanded system. The state of Alaska is not connected to any larger grid. So in the lower 48, a lot of states are connected to each other, and they buy power back and forth. But not in Alaska. The only quote-unquote grid, you could say, is the rail belt, which is there. Glen Allen is not interconnected. I'll talk about that later. But essentially, the 6 utilities are Homer Electric, City of Seward, MLMP, Chugach, MEA, Golden Valley, although MLMP might be going away within the next year or so because, as you know, Chugach and MLMP, Chugach is looking at acquiring MLMP, and the voters approved that recently. Many rural communities actually all rural communities are islanded, so essentially we have a lot of islanded systems in an islanded system. And islanded is just a kind of a trade word, or word of the trade, that says you're not connected to anything, right? You're an island on your own. And this poses, I say the last bullet, challenges not faced in the interconnected United States. In terms of resiliency issues and reliability, we don't have another state to call and say, hey, our system's down in the rail belt, can you send some power over, or things along those. So it poses a lot of challenges. So that's kind of where we are. In the lower 48, they can't fathom this. It's so interconnected down there. So what has this meant? It's meant that we're a little bit different in that most our utilities are essentially generation, transmission, and distribution utilities. So in terms of co-ops, in the lower 48, what you mostly will see is a G&T, a generation and transmission cooperative, that generates the power and sends it out, and then distribution cooperatives that then buy the power and send that out to their members. Not so here, because we don't have that sort of a structure in the islanded way. So we're just vertically integrated utilities, and so everybody in this state, now some rural utilities don't have transmission, right? They put it right in the distribution system. They're small enough, but it's a lot different in the low 48. And this has caused our members to have to be as resilient as possible. They don't have any backup, as I said. We're also unique in Alaska is that we have 15% of the world's microgrids, and I'll talk more about microgrids later. Mira Cooler, who is the CEO of Alaska Village Electric Cooperative, that serves 59 villages, only one connected by road. She's been in front of Congress more times than you can count, talking about microgrids as they explore this. Because microgrids can mean other things. So you can have a building that can be a microgrid if it can be separated from the grid and still provide, still have power, still provide its own power. That's essentially a microgrid. And so, I mean, maybe if your house, if you had a generator, technically you could be a microgrid if you could have, generate your own power off the grid. But our members have had to be really innovative to keep service reliable and affordable, and that's a big issue in Alaska. And feel free to jump in with questions if you have them. I'll answer the ones I can, and the ones I can't, I'll pull the fire alarm or something. Our generation sources, as they stand today, we have a variety of generation sources in the state. Diesel is highly prevalent in the rural parts of the state, especially western Alaska and some places in the southeast. Natural gas, of course, is a lot of the railroad utilities in my neck of the woods, MEA, Chugach, Homer, are natural gas, oil, coal, wind, hydro, and solar are coming up. I pulled this graph at the right from the Energy Information Administration. It's fairly current, January 2018, and you can look at what the generation sources are in terms of megawatt hours. So natural gas fired is still the most, and I would surmise that's because that natural gas is serving the most populated area of the state. So it's only natural that megawatt hours would be higher there. Petroleum fired is still pretty high compared to other places, but hydroelectric is a significant source of electricity in the state of Alaska. Golden Valley buys hydroelectric power from Bradley Lake, way down across Kachemak Bay. It is coming up, and one of the things that APA really pushes on, especially with the federal government, is the importance of hydro and hydro streamlining the permitting. You know, hydroelectricity right now is not considered renewable in terms of for the federal government. And the reason they did that is under the Obama administration, when they were looking at a lot of clean air type of rules and regulations, if they counted hydro as a renewable, then a lot of states would have already complied with clean air regulations. So they didn't count it as renewable, right? And so how do you know? Go figure. So when we go back to DC, we, in our delegation, you know, Senator Sullivan, Murkowski, and Representative Young are on board, of course, with hydro. And Senator Murkowski has an energy bill sitting in the United States Senate right now that does a lot with hydro streamlining of the permitting. The permitting process is insane. And Copper Valley Electric Association can tell you, they spent about 5 to 7, maybe even 10 years and millions of dollars just almost in the permitting phase to get these projects going. And so what Senator Murkowski's bill does is it puts FERC in charge and puts some teeth into it where they can hold some of these other agencies to timelines to get these permits done faster. That's really important to utilities in our state because they're usually small with a smaller ratepayer base. And so, you know, they want these projects to be economical. And I'll talk a little bit more about these renewables later. According to my slide, I will. Each source comes with its advantages and challenges, of course, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. This is where we are in 2018. These are our sources. Coal, you know, down at Healy and Golden Valley uses coal. So it's quite a range. Just look at what's going on in the rail belt. I know Golden Valley's been in here within the past month, I think, right? And I don't know, they probably talked about this, so I know you're well aware, but I was looking at it. There's a picture of the Northern Intertie. That's beautiful. The Northern Intertie, I'm sure GVA has said it was just a game changer in terms of electric reliability and reliability essentially in this part of the state. What the railroad utilities are doing on a voluntary basis, and that's something that our association has really worked on their behalf to promote, is they're doing this on a we don't want the government to step in and force them to do something. And they've tried, and it doesn't go well, we believe, for our members. They're working on a power pooling agreement. This is essentially where, you know, they're looking at pooling the power resources, running the most efficient generator. They do it in a sense. They have a loose pool. You know, they're always calling back and forth, buying power from each other up and down the rail belt, depending on who's got the cheapest power, what the power needs are. I know Golden Valley, I've heard Corey say multiple times, they're buying from the south constantly throughout the day and throughout the week. Reliability standards. So the railroad utilities just filed with the RCA a set of shared and agreed to reliability standards up and down the rail belt, something that didn't exist at this point. It's something the RCA wanted from them. They've filed it. It's up to the RCA to look at it and kind of make that determination. The RCA looks at it just as it sounds like, reliability standards, right? Resiliency in the grid, making sure that the power is as reliable as possible to the folks up and down the rail belt that take that power. They're also looking at forming a rail belt transmission company. This is Transco for short. You'll see these all over the low 48, where essentially an independent company runs the transmission, and you have the co-ops then generate the power and distribute it, but the transmission is run by a separate company governed by a board and with utility makeup, and it's meant to, the main purpose is an investment tool to look at where the needs are and how they can properly invest in it and site it and have, you know, the ability to do so, and then reliability issues and kind of coordination. You mostly see these in low 48 where there's a lot more grid action, right? Bigger grid, so that there's a smooth, seamless transferring of power. And as we've grown, it's been something that the rail belt's been talking about. So the population in the core area of the state has grown up. It's still taking place. APA is not directly involved with this. We're not a utility, so we're not involved in negotiations. Like I said, as far as the association, we work on behalf of our members to ensure that the government is allowing this to move forward, the state government, in a voluntary, self-directed manner. You can see the goals. They want to file a CPCN, Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, for the for Transco here eventually, and so it's something I think over the next year it's going to get a lot of work. Golden Valley would be best suited to tell you how it's going to affect them directly better than I can. But that's kind of where they are. They've been working on this for quite a while. You may have heard of some bills that have been filed in the legislature. Representative Wool had a bill this year that would have set up a rail belt electric transmission authority. We didn't like it because of the makeup of the board. It really excluded the utilities from the board after a certain number of years. And of course, there's a lot of different interests that want to, that have different reasons for wanting a transco or a certain transmission structure. But from our point of view, we say the utilities need to have seats on that board because they're the experts. They're the subject matter experts. They're the people generating the power and putting it out there. So we didn't think the bill was the right approach. But it brought people to the table in Juneau, and they talked about it publicly. And so I think that was the goal. As you know, most things in Juneau are dead at the moment. Don't get me started on, oh gosh, I worked down there for 4 years. It was like I still have nightmares. But it's so anyway, we'll see what happens with that next year. So electricity in rural Alaska, and we like to talk about with our members, we call it the symbiotic relationship between railbelt and rural. And Rick Shakura on the Golden Valley Board will talk about that all the time, about how a lot of what happens in rural Alaska really has an economic impact on Fairbanks because this is a hub for a lot of rural places. And I know I've heard Rick say before, if rural Alaska withers away or loses so much population, it's going to affect Fairbanks at some point in terms of economic output, maybe cargo flights or things along those. People come into town for their services and their goods, and so it's been a concern because a lot of people say, well, how does APA balance that rail belt membership with that rural membership, such different needs? And we say, they're intertwined in a lot of aspects. And a strong rural Alaska really means a strong rail belt Alaska too, because they're really hooked together. And of course, there's other reasons. Power cost equalization in the rural parts of the state. The rate is based off the average of Fairbanks, Anchorage, and Juneau. And so as the price of power goes up in the rail belt, PCE subsidy goes down in the rural Alaska. So because I don't remember the calculation, it's very complicated, but that's the basic look at it. Is the cost of power goes down in the rail belt, PCE subsidy will go up in rural Alaska because it's a disparity. It's trying to subsidize that disparity. But rural Alaska faces considerable challenges, and kind of those four are the biggest: transportation and availability of fuel. A lot of rural Alaska runs on diesel. That's their generation source. But getting it there, I mean, it's difficult. And we've seen, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, we had to have the Russian icebreakers kind of come through and help us get fuel and goods to the rural villages. It's a big deal with barging it out there and flying it out there. That's a significant cost. Fluctuating diesel prices don't help. I mean, it's very difficult. If you talk to a railbelt utility, maybe down in my area, like MEA, they have a gas contract for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, so they know their costs. But in rural Alaska, it can fluctuate significantly. Declining sales, as we see the climate warm, and of course, there's opinions as to why it's warming and if it is or not. But if you talk to our member in Kotzebue Electric, they will talk about their sales declining because of the warming winters in the Arctic, and it's hurting them because they have fixed costs that they have to pay, and when the sales decline, they don't have the funds coming in to do that, and they have to make adjustments. Small ratepayer base is really difficult, and that's why it's so hard for a lot of these small cooperatives in rural Alaska to integrate expensive projects that maybe could lower the cost of power because they have such a small rate base to spread that cost out over. And of course, they're a nonprofit, right? So you're being very careful with your dollars. That's a really stunning picture there. Tuksuk Bay is an AVAC co-op, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what they do with that. They're overcoming these challenges. Microgrids is something we'll talk about in a little bit, but the integration of renewables. When you go to Western Alaska now, you will find wind turbines everywhere. Kotzebue, Unalakleet, many villages that AVAC runs. I mentioned Kotzebue. Who else has them out there? Quite a few. Stebbins, I think, has them now. Tuksuk Bay. What they're doing is they're essentially holding the cost of fuel steady. So when Uniloclete, Reese Huta, the manager out there, will say he's got 6 wind turbines. And this is a combination of loans, state grants, and then debt financing. But they've held his members' diesel fuel costs flat for the last, I think he reported 4 or 5 years. They've been there for about 6. And so it's helping with that. It's not dramatically decreasing costs because it's variable power, right? The wind doesn't always blow, but it's providing enough that they're not burning as much diesel, and their cost for their fuel is actually holding steady. It's not increasing. So it's helpful, right? It costs something, but it's helping the folks out there in rural Alaska. Hydro is a lot, really along the coast and southeast, but Nushagak and Dillingham is now looking at building a hydro project. And with this, you could see some microgrid action. It's in the beginning stages, but they're looking at interconnecting some AVEC villages to this low-cost hydro fuel. Solar's coming on. Believe it or not, Naknek Electric has solar. Casa View has solar. Golden Valley here, you guys have probably heard, is, should be, I think, almost starting to construct a solar farm this summer. It's coming on. Batteries are big, and I believe I have a slide later. If not, I'll have to back up. Battery technology, as it grows and becomes more affordable, is going to be a game changer, absolute game changer. I do this mental thought where I think one of the robots is going to finally take my job, right, in technology, because one of these days batteries and renewable power are going to, I don't tell anybody in my membership that said this, but they're going to replace the need for power lines. And when the technology grows, you can, Tesla's working on this, where you can self-generate your power at your home. And if you have a battery bank that's advanced enough to hold enough power, eventually you could disconnect from the grid, essentially. A lot of people who, I don't know, does anybody in here have a self-contained system, a renewable system at their house? But you're connected to the grid still for reliability, right? I mean, you want to have that. But if you could...
Well, actually, I'm on the first generation SNAP system, so I'm selling to the grid all the time and buying.
Okay, so it's helpful.
Yeah.
But if you found a way...
I've got a battery backup system,
right.
So if the power goes off, I've got 24 hours of my own power.
That's pretty good. Golden Valley has the best system, which at the time in 2003 was the largest battery in the world. I don't know if it still is or not. I don't know.
Yeah, they came and told us.
Yeah, they're very proud of that. It's really neat. So
it's really helped in terms of the short outages.
Right.
It's really made a big difference.
And that's the big point. And we kind of joke amongst the communication side, people get very angry when their power goes out, right? I mean, we've become so accustomed to having power nowadays. It's out for a significant amount of time. And think of all the disruption it makes. So having a battery like that can provide that pickup until, in Golden Valley's case, until another plant can come online and pick up that lost load. It's really powerful. So rural Alaska's, they're coming along, but it's still tough. So we'll talk about microgrids a little bit. The first bullet there kind of sums it up. It's a local electric grid that can run independently of a larger traditional grid. I talked to one of the engineers at AVEC, and he said, Mike, it's technically all of Alaska, right? I mean, there is no larger traditional grid up here. We're all a microgrid. AVEC operates a lot of microgrids, and what they've begun doing out there in rural Alaska is intertying 2 villages or more if they can. So you see the Brevik Mission, the Teller intertie. And what this has allowed them to do is, of course, in all their villages, everybody has a power generation source. They can shut down one of them, save money, run the more efficient generation. And then if something goes haywire over here, they got a backup. So it's a little bit of redundancy they didn't have out there nowadays or in the past. And they're finally finding the means and the ways to do this, to invest in these tie lines, basically, where they're tying these villages together. Stebbins and St. Michael were intertied a few years ago, and it helped a lot with their costs out there. They shut down the power plant. I think the one in Stebbins shut down, and they just run the one in St. Michael's, and it provides some redundancy. We have it in the rail belt, right? I mean, if Golden Valley, if something went down here, they could have power from assuming the intertie is fine, they could have power from the south sent up. That's not something they had in rural Alaska for a long time, and now they're finally getting it. So this is helpful because, as everyone in this room knows, if the cost of power is high, it affects business decisions, it affects economic growth, it affects what people buy. I mean, if they have to choose between buying goods or services or paying their electricity bill, I mean, that's a hard choice. And as I said, it all ties back into the Fairbanks area because rural Alaska spends money in Fairbanks, and it's an economic boost out here. So a healthy rural Alaska is important. So I mentioned a little bit about renewables. Alaska Electric Utilities right off the bat are investing in renewables. There's GVA's, one of their wind turbines at Eva Creek. Has anyone ever been to Eva Creek before? No, it's really stunning. I mean, it's just north of Healy. You probably know where it is, and it's quite a beautiful location. I don't think you have a more picturesque wind farm in the country. I've seen the ones in Iowa. They don't hold a candle to Denali in the background.
Well, I was going to say, it's kind of cheating with
Yeah,
Denali in the background.
It's kind of hard, right?
Yeah.
Then I put this picture up on a presentation I gave to a group in the Lower 48, and somebody accused me of superimposing the thing. That's not up there. And I said, yeah, they won't let you build that. And I'm like, well, that mountain's still probably like 60, 70 miles away. It's just really big, right? It's funny down there. Significant hydro integration. This is, in 2018, the hydro integration in Alaska is massive. I mentioned Dillingham is a new project. Southeast Alaska, the only wholesaler in Alaska is SEPA, which is based down in Ketchikan, and so they sell power to Ketchikan, Petersburg, and Wrangell, all hydro, full hydro, and I think it's, what do they pay, like 8 or 9 cents a kilowatt hour, I think, for their electricity. IPEC, Inside Passage Electric Cooperative, they serve villages like Una and Cake. They're investing in hydro, and again, this is that holding those fuel costs. Hydro is a consistent low-cost source of power, not low cost of build, but the kilowatt-hour cost out of there. South Central, I mentioned Bradley Lake. I'm going to have a slide on it on here. Bradley Lake provides hydropower up and down the rail belt. Cordova's got hydropower. Kodiak is 99.8% renewable energy. Very good success story down there. And so, sometimes things happen a little later in Alaska than they do other places. And so the renewable integration in Alaska has really come out in abundance quite a bit. Wind power, I mentioned just a bit ago, Fire Island, anybody flown in Anchorage and seen the wind turbines, and they're looking to do another phase on Fire Island. And I think they're talking to Golden Valley actually about buying that power. The way that in our co-op members look at this, when they're buying renewables, it can't raise the cost of power essentially for the ratepayers. It has to work out, and so they look at the numbers pretty close on this. But it's really exciting, I think. Solar coming online as well. Golden Valley has started the solar project. I mentioned some of those. Do you guys have a lot of solar homes? Do you have solar panels on your houses? I see it pop up. I live in Palmer, and it's popping up all over the place. Residential solar is in abundance. Although it's funny, I was walking my dogs one night, and I noticed that one of my neighbors has these solar panels on his roof, right? He's got one on this side of his roof, one on this side of his roof, and he's got a little wind turbine too. It drives this big honking diesel, right? He's got this huge F-350 diesel, and every time it starts to, it belches off this cloud. So maybe he's just compensating. Right? It's kind of bad, because I'm looking at his driveway saying, that's a honking diesel that guy drives around this. So anyway, can't question him. So I think it's an exciting time for renewables in the state, and it's really exciting, like I said, what they're doing with batteries, which I'll talk about next. Yes.
Quick question on that renewable. So I was at the Rural Energy Conference, right, and seeing some of these rural communities, trying to connect with the technology, right, and the experts on. Because we're a little bit later to the game on some of those things, are we getting maybe more of the bugs worked out of some of the technologies or the design of things, or are people still having issues just because they're systems that are designed to not be siloed?
That's a good question. Actually, from my understanding, talking to our members, we've actually kind of benefited in that regard, and that the bugs are worked out. We're getting the latest and greatest. Cossaville was the first Arctic utility to have utility scale wind, and they worked out a lot of bugs as they went along with it. But now they can stand up a wind turbine, put it on their system, and it's instant, right? And they have a battery up there too. I think it's depending on your thoughts about Alaska's Constitution, but maybe we'll say our Constitution is so great because we learned from 48 other states about what to put into it. I really think our members have benefited quite significantly. They're getting into it, especially with batteries. when the technology is just increasing so significantly, but then the costs are coming down too. That's another big part of it. A lot of, in the past, a lot of this stuff was kind of cost prohibitive to some of our members, and now that it's come down a little ways, and there's a lot more companies entering the space. So on Thursday, I'm talking to an organization called Launch Alaska. You might know them in Anchorage, and they're a business incubator. They're in the energy space, and so they have these 4 companies that they've seeded with money, essentially, that are coming up with all these various renewable type of projects, and their focus is underserved. They call them energy poverty areas, and some parts of Alaska you could categorize as having energy poverty. I mean, without PCE, some of the costs in some of these villages are 80 cents a kilowatt hour, $1 a kilowatt hour. That's crushing. And so there's new technologies and new players in the game that want to get this stuff out, and they see Alaska as this major proving ground, because what's more rural than Alaska, right? I mean, I argue that Railbelt Alaska is rural compared to quite a lot of other places in the country. And so it's real exciting, yeah. I mean, they're coming on to it. And the batteries I looked this up just last week I put this together. There's now 700 megawatts of installed utility scale battery capacity in the U.S. and growing too. GVA's BESS we talked about. Other batteries are in Kodiak, Kotzebue, Quig-Illinuk. Did I get that right? Kong-Giganak.
That's vernacular is Quig and Kong.
Okay, they just joined. Quig just joined. Quig Power Company just joined our membership. And Kong, I'll just call him Kong. How about that? But in these, and of course, the final 2 are much smaller than the first 2. I mean, they're benefiting significantly from these batteries in terms of backup, load following, and they're advanced. I was in Kotzebue one time, and they had somebody coming up to serve their battery. It's funny, he was from Jacksonville, Florida. This guy flew up, and it was December in Kotzebue, and he came up to do this regular maintenance, and it's like, yeah, I left, it was 95 degrees, and it was like 27 below or something up there.
And blowing our winds.
And blowing, yeah. I didn't think the plane was going to make it that day, but just another day. And the final bullet there is kind of major for the rural areas. Advances in battery technology, they're going to help the regulation of renewables and reliability. Reliability, and that's what we say. Especially in the rural parts of the state that are significantly islanded. Sometimes you'll hear horror stories of power going out in the village for whatever reason, but the weather's bad and they can't fly linemen out there for 2 or 3 days. They're pretty resilient folks, so they're not gonna, right, but you'd like to have your power for certain reasons. So battery technology is exciting, and it's growing in Alaska quite a bit. Kodiak has a flywheel, that's their battery. And really, I don't know if I mentioned this, I think I do another slide. Hydroelectricity is essentially a giant battery too. I mean, the reservoir for a hydro is a battery. I mean, you need more power, you open up the spigot a little more and send more down into the turbines. So that's the big advantage of hydropower. Does everybody know of Bradley Lake down there? I got the chance to fly out there last year, and that's a stunning project. I actually went down in this giant hole right there, which is your height of verse. That little building right there, they have an emergency shutoff way at the bottom, so their penstock comes out, and they have this giant thing, I don't know what to call it, door, basically, that they slap it shut, but it's at the bottom of this 150-foot pit. To get down, there's these spiral staircase that are just screwed to the side. I'm sure it's safe, but I walked halfway down and my legs got wobbly and I go back up again. This is a 120 megawatt project, and it generates 380,000 megawatts per year. Supplies all Railbelt utilities. I think the amazing part of this is the power from Bradley Lake is going all the way to the Delta Junction. I mean, think how far those electrons are moving. It's been in operation since 1991. The exciting thing is they're doing a Battle Creek project to add water to Bradley Lake, and it's diverting natural runoff basically in a creek over, to add more water, like a battery, right? They're adding more electric energy potential into that reservoir there. It's a really good project. It's helped significantly in the Railbelt, I think, and Railbelt utilities buy the power from there. And if it holds down some burning of the fossil fuels, and you save some money, you save a little bit in the environment. So the expansion of that should be pretty neat.
Does some of that power make it to Seward?
It does, yeah. Actually, there's something called the Bradley Lake Project Management Committee. So it's owned by the state, but it's basically run by the utilities. and the utilities run it as part of a board. Homer Electric operates it under contract with the state. The way it was financed is the state financed it on the agreement that the utilities would buy power from it, the power purchase agreements. I think that's actually the term of that loan is coming to a close here pretty soon, and it'll be paid off. And I'm not sure what will happen. We've heard talk about maybe this state divesting itself of some of these things. So we'll see.
Actually, it was half grant funded and half debt financed.
Right. Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, I missed that.
And the debt financing is coming to an end, and now they have to, for the 30 years, they have to continue to pay at the same rate they were paying debt service to the state.
Right. But maybe they want to find a way to not do that.
And they could divest of it, and
Yeah.
I'm sure the utilities want to buy out of that.
Right.
It is still 4.5 cent power.
Michael, do you know this guy?
I don't.
Oh,
I'll
Steve
use that
Haggis.
later.
He used to be
I know the name.
president and
Yeah.
CEO of Golden Valley and
Yeah.
also AEA director.
Perfect. Well, the new AEA director, Janet Reiser, came from Chugach Electric, and so it's kind of different world over there these days. Has anyone heard of the road belt intertie? You've heard of that?
Yeah.
So it's not a new concept, but it's getting.
I was talking about it when we were talking about.
Yeah, that's a Robert Wilkinson thing. It's
Oh,
called
we
railroad
had
belt.
we had a
Everybody
presentation.
calls it
that we
railroad,
talked
but
about
railroad
it.
goes north and south.
Right.
The problem is that Robert Wilkinson wanted to try and be part of the club. He's not interconnected, so he's, let's call it the road belt.
Right.
That's how it got there.
And so it's not a new concept, but there's, what do they call it down there? There's well, I think it's the Economic Development Corporation. It's like it's a one-man show down there in the Glen Allen area. They revived it, basically. And so there's a renewed push behind it. It's not a new concept, obviously, but
Audna's really pushing it too.
who is?
Audna.
Right, yeah. There's I guess there's some military areas up and down the ridge I wasn't aware of. I didn't know, but there's a renewed push on it. Basically, just like it sounds, it would connect the road belt. I mean, all the way around. You have power. It would connect MEA in Copper Valley, and then Copper Valley would connect in at Delta to Golden Valley. The obstacles is the big thing. Funding, right? Where are you going to find the money? Right now, they're working on financing for a reconnaissance study. I know that his name is Jason Hokey. He's the head of the, I can't remember what they call it down there, their Economic Development Corporation. He's been back and forth to DC quite a bit, talking this up. It seems like one of those things to me that everyone's in favor of, but where do you find the money for it is the question. And so it's something that we followed. APA wrote a letter supportive of the concept and of looking for the funding. You see, GVA and TCC, Tanana Teas Conference, have been supportive. It seems like a good idea. Will it happen? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we did that study 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably still valid electrically, all the Northeast Intertie.
Right.
We had got Golden Valley looking at their files in the back room, and they'll probably pull it out for you.
Yeah.
Down to, electrical analysis, environmental, and the problem wasn't funding. The problem was that we actually had funding for a while, and until Tony Knowles took us back.
Mm-hmm.
And so the biggest problem is getting from Sutton, getting out of Sutton, number one.
Right.
A big problem because they don't want you there. And getting across the viewpoint of that glacier that gets to I'm not sure what the glacier name, but
Yeah, the Matanuska Glacier.
big viewing station right there.
Yeah, that's the Matanuska.
Good luck. And if you get off the road more than a couple of miles and you're up and down this kind of there's a lot of issues with it.
Well, history is repeating itself because Sutton,
Yeah.
just the same. They had a public meeting and Sutton was basically like,
Right.
oh, hell no.
Yeah, I know. And that was the problem we had.
Right. And there's a 12-mile service gap there between MEA and Copper Valley, but like you said, it's complicated. I mean,
The distribution service and transmission service are two
different
totally
things.
different things.
Right. And
So there are some changing dynamics though, and some of the local native groups down there have their own powered systems that they want to get online, and so there are some changing dynamics in terms of that bottleneck.
You want to hear the biggest obstruction to it?
what?
There's no load.
Yeah, well, there's not many people out
You
there.
know, why build a transmission line if there's no power to put across it?
Right.
The way it pays for itself is to send power across it, which is unfortunately the same problem you're gonna have with a rail belt transmission upgrade.
Yeah.
There's not gonna be much load going across that for a long time.
And that's, I mean,
Unless you build to Sitna, that would change the world, but that's a bigger problem. But with the way you build a transmission line, and you take debt out, the
Right.
grant finance, go for it, right?
sure.
But if you're taking debt out, you better figure out how you're gonna pay it back, and the way you pay it back is to put power across that transmission line.
Yeah.
You gotta
Yeah.
use it.
It seemed like there was some excitement when President Trump talked about his infrastructure package, which I don't foresee happening. One thing the APA does is we impress upon them that electric transmission is infrastructure, right? Don't just think roads, bridges, and airports. I mean, look at the transmission system and stuff, but, you know, all we can do is, you know, folks can keep supporting it. I noticed one thing since I live in Alaska, there's a lot of things that get worked on, then stop, and get worked on again and stop. You know, I mean, I worked on the Knick Arm Bridge project, for Pete's sake, and it's like, how many times that one, I could write a book about what happened there. So it's nice, but the trend is, like we say, there's not much load, right? This is the problem they have in rural Alaska lives. There's a small rate pace. It's just hard to pencil these projects out. But it's interesting. I find it neat, and like you said, I mean, if you could find a way to grant fund this, it'd be, you know, go for it. It'd be great. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I know that there's some people that spend quite a lot of time in DC talking about it. So we'll see. So where are we now? We kind of did the good, the bad, and I don't want to say the ugly, so the encouraging. Consumers are more energy savvy. We've seen this. I mean, we think this is good. Sometimes I make a joke, you know, I work for the electric utilities, but I've made my house as energy efficient as possible. So I say that MEA is my service. I say, maybe I shouldn't say it's in front of you, but yeah, I mean, I try to spend as little as I can on energy, and that kind of plays down lower. New technologies are benefiting electric generation. We talked about some of those. Costs are starting to come down on some of the emerging technology. That's good. Batteries, other renewables, and things along those lines. The bad, this is in Alaska, kilowatt hour sales are declining. This has implications. And some service areas are losing consumers. We have a member out that provides power to McGrath, and they're losing people constantly. I mean, they're moving out of town. So we've all read the very sad stories of places in the Aleutians, you know, towns just, when the school shuts down, that's kind of it. And so some of APA's members in rural Alaska, they're really gritting their teeth over a lot of this, about the exodus of folks moving into the more urban areas. The encouraging electric vehicles, actually, and it's a great way to pick up load, especially at night when the people plug them in and, you know, they're charging, and that's kind of a low load time at night. Utilities across the country have begun promoting electric vehicle technology for that very reason. It's an additional load. Most of the utilities up here in Alaska have a demonstration car. Golden Valley has, it's kind of a hybrid sort of electric car, but you see a lot of electric vehicles in the southeast. I was in Cordova, somebody's got like a $200,000 Tesla down there. I don't know where you're driving it, but they have it. They got the money. So
They have a free charging station in Cordova too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and charging stations. I mean, Juneau, Alaska Electric Light and Power has put charging stations all around Juneau. So you see that in the lower 48. When I talk to some of the co-ops down there, there's some promotion of it. You know, we'll put charging stations in these parts of town. So that's encouraging. Battery technology is improving. We talked about that. And the encouraging utilities are becoming more consumer centric. I mean, they're really, as the energy savviness has increased, the consumer-centric nature of the utility has increased too. I mean, they know that people are paying attention to this stuff, especially in the state where costs are high. And you know, as an example of this, so I was in DC 2 weeks ago with Northwest Public Power Association, and I was with the manager of Central Lincoln PUD, which serves the coast of Oregon, and their residential kilowatt hour rate is 7 cents a kilowatt hour. Their average monthly usage is 1,100 kilowatt hours a month for residential, whereas in Alaska, the average monthly is between 400 and 500 kilowatt hours a month, but the average kilowatt hour, like at MEA, I pay 19 cents a kilowatt hour. So we're talking about the you know, just the mental portion of that, right? I mean, what you do when you're paying higher and you're conserving, whereas if you're paying, and I said, boy, if the people in your district, in your, you know, service area thought like us, their electricity costs would be nil, right? I mean, they only had, you know, I mean, my personal, at my house, we, even in the winter, we don't go above maybe 300, 350 kilowatt hours a month because we're just very, so, but it's, so people are becoming more savvy on this stuff, and is like, you know, they just are, and so utilities are becoming more consumer centric as well, and that's encouraging. And I think that's it. There's a good looking logo. That one's not cross stitching. Thanks. I hope I was of some interest in help. That's kind of the picture of 2018 and where utilities are and where they're going. Like I said, we have challenges in the state they don't face other places, but the ingenuity of the folks up here, it really prevails, and you know, it's exciting. And I'm happy to take questions or complaints.
How many members do you have? It sounds like you may have 100 members
So,
or something.
we have a lot.
Utilities.
We have 3 different categories: active
Right,
members,
right.
sell 800 megawatt hours or more a year; associate members sell less; and then supporting or non-utilities that have an interest. We have 19 active members currently. Chugach and MLP are not currently a member of Alaska Power Association. And then I think we have 14 associate members, and then we have something like 65 supporting members. So most of the state, from Barrow down to Unalaska, Yavik, you call it now, down to Unalaska, throughout the interior, South Central, and up the Inside Passage is our membership base.
And AVEC.
AVEC, yeah.
They have 50-something.
50, they just acquired Yakutat, so they provide the AVEC has the largest service territory in the world for a co-op. If you look at, you know, it's an interesting utility. And like I said, only one on the road, so they're all off the road system.
What's the one on the road?
I don't remember. It's something.
Minto.
Minto, that's right. It's close to here. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good membership. We take a trip to DC every year, and the manager, Ben France from Barrow's Electric Utility, comes down. He grew up in Kaktovik, and to hear him talk to these folks about the way things used to be and how they are, he's got stories. But then poor guy, it's always 100 degrees in DC, and he's just like an ice cube, you know. I always feel so bad for him. But yeah, so that's what we're working on. And you know, APA we do a government relations with the state. So right now we're following pretty closely the budgets. There's money in the Renewable Energy Fund, and as more rural utilities take on Renewable Energy Fund grants for different projects. So that's actually in there this year. It hasn't been funded in the past 2 cycles. So it's kind of exciting. The governor put it in, it's been maintained. So we'll see how that goes. But it's an exciting time.
So the utilities, you know, one of the issues that's kind of been over the period of time is the ability of these various utilities to play together in the same sandbox. Just kind of an interesting point. You have 2 utilities, 2 large utilities that aren't members of your organization. Any particular reason?
Yeah, well, yeah, Chugach Electric, they left because they wanted changes in the way that the association that we did our business essentially. They wanted to, so everybody in APA has 1 member, 1 vote, right? I mean, from the smallest utility to the largest utility. Chugach wanted weighted voting, so the larger you were, the more votes you had. Our board said no, but that's not how we work. We're statewide, and then so they left. MLP left, they said, because of budgetary reasons, and that was that. So hopefully we'll get you guys back. I mean, they were a good member, but they had just differences in the way that they wanted to see APA do things, and that was that. So.
I think they're concerned about the tail wagging the dog. They're asking for a way to vote, but they're really, do you get value? They're funding a big chunk of APA at the time, and the small utilities really weren't.
Yeah,
That's been a problem for, 20 years?
Yeah, it's always, I mean, the due structure of our organization is based on your kilowatt hour sales and your number of consumers. So a larger utility is paying significantly more than a small utility. It comes up every once in a while. For most of our members, it's not a problem. We break it out by, we have a calculation, we'll break it out per meter, right? So if your dues are this much, this is how much you're paying per meter, right? And of course, economies of scale, it's very little if you're a large utility that you're paying. It's larger per meter if you're a smaller utility. That wasn't very moving, but you guys, we told them that.
Then they started getting moved by the small utilities to places that they didn't agree with. That's probably was your biggest problem. And
It was I think for them it was a concern. It hasn't happened since I've been on board. Mostly, I mean, our every year we do a state policy position process. We used to call them priorities. We've changed it now to policy positions, and it's a mix. I mean, we try to stay statewide. Obviously, a rail belt utility has different needs and issues than a rural utility. The concern was that rural members might want something that the rail belt members wouldn't want to do, but we haven't had any issues with that because the way that we come up with our policy positions is everyone in the association. We have a government relations committee that's made up of utility members from all parts of the state. They've put the positions forward to the full board, which is made up of all of our utilities, and they vote to approve them. And so we have some fully statewide. We have a couple that pertain just to rail belt. We have a couple that pertain just to rural, but usually it's more of a cooperative type of, yeah, well, no problem, we'll support that. So in my time, it has not been an issue.
Yeah, going back historically, but that point, it's usually not an issue. The rub comes in when you have two big utilities. That was really what caused the whole problem with MEA at the time, under different leadership, and Chugach. They wanted different things, and they went to you, and they said, we want you to advocate for our position, and you said, oh, we have a conflict, we're not going to advocate for either position.
Yeah, that was in like...
And they both looked at you like, okay, what are you doing for me now?
Right.
That was really what caused it. It was two big utilities.
Yeah, that was pre-2010, right? Wasn't it before? It was like 2000.
Yeah.
I've heard the stories. It doesn't seem to happen anymore.
I live there.
Because they're not there anymore.
Steve actually caused it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that I'm gone, it's not a problem.
Yeah. Well, luckily, luckily we haven't had to deal with it so much. It's pretty harmonious nowadays.
Other questions?
Do you play any role in the technology of battery replacement?
We don't ourselves. I mean, we will connect.
So that's up to the individual members.
Individuals, right? Yeah, we don't do any sort of procurement or anything like that.
Most of the manufacturers do a cradle to grave. You buy it from them, they'll buy it back. They can recycle the materials.
Yep.
Clark?
I was wondering whether the university and the engineering and the energy center, whether that's been kind of a boon or at least helpful in with some of the renewables and some of the
Like ASAP?
research. Yeah.
Yeah, they have. I mean, a lot of our utilities work with Glenn Holman over there, and
Yeah.
it's been a proving ground for a lot of technology for sure. They're a member of APA, and so we have them at a lot of our events. Actually, they'll come and talk about what they're working on and things that they're doing. So, yeah, that's a neat place. And
I was thinking in terms of innovativeness and new research and
especially with the cold climate centric, right?
documentation.
Yeah,
monitoring.
yeah.
You see the microgrid technology that they have kind of innovated, make it to the rural Alaska.
I think AVEC works really closely with them on that. I'm pretty sure they do. I know Mira does, and so.
Mira's on their board.
Yeah, and so it definitely it's out there. Yeah, I think Glenn's going to come talk at our annual meeting actually here in August and talk about what they're working on. So it's an exciting place.
Cool. Thank you, Michael.
Absolutely.
Appreciate your
Thank
comments.
So, next week we have Jimmy Fox coming and talking about the impacts of the borough-wide initiative on the ballot.